Hello students, today we will discuss India-China relationship in changing global world. If you see, America is imposing tariff after tariff on India, and if you look at the American attitude, it has changed, especially towards India. Now if you look at, should India and China sink their differences and come together? Now if you look at India, China and Russia, they were the actually very good friend. India, Russia and China, they were the good friend, and they were actually envisioning multipolar world. But if you look at in the recent decade, India and China actually struggled for making good relationship because of the India China border conflict. But if you look at the American attitude, right now the question comes to the mind that what should be the response of India and China, right, and along with Russia, should they come together to look, the multipolar world that we want, right? So today is that topic that we need to discuss, because India and China relationship need to be examined afresh, basically. So here I'm talking about Indian-China relationship in a broader context. Now, if you look at India and China, both are two big civilizations, and both civilizations has made an impact on several countries. Now, if you look, people from China come to India, right? Like Fayan, and if you look at modern time, the both country has become actually free from colonialism in 1950. The same time, right? Both country became independent. But if you look at, India became a democratic country, and China has become a communist country, right? If I talk about the size of China, now if you look at, China is actually thrice of India in terms of area. In terms of area, what does it mean? China is 3 Indian territory can sink into the Chinese territory. Now if you look at in economic term, it is 1:5. 1:5. It means the Chinese economy is 5 times bigger than Indian economy. In 2025, I'm talking about, right? Now, if you look at Indian economy, it is valuated like, 3.9 trillion dollar, right? Trillion dollar. Now, if you look at Chinese economy, it is approximately I'm talking about 19 trillion dollar, right? So if you look at Chinese economy, it is 5 times in terms of economy, in terms of economy, right? And that is very, very important for India. Should India sink their differences and align with China, make good economic relationship so that both countries can be benefited, right? Now, if you look at in terms of population, right? India is the largest populous country, right? And it has largest young demography, right? Working age people. Now, both country can have a benefit, right? Now, we will come to this point, but let me talk about the historical relationship between India and China. As I told you that India and China both had become independent at the same point of time. India in 1947 and China In 1949, if you look at, the communist government came, and India was the first country which recognized communist China. India was the first country to recognize China. Now, if you look at India, also recognized communist China at UNSC, United Nations Security Council, right? In the context when US and Western world was not recognizing communist China, rather they were recognizing the KMT government, right? So India recognized UNSC, right? India recognized China at UNSC, right? Now, if you look at Nehru had different vision. Nehru had different vision towards China. Now, he had idea that, look, both country, India and China, were victim of colonialism, and therefore the both countries should rise and play a vital role in international politics. And that's why, if you look at, Nehru recognized communist China. Now, when China attacked Tibet, right? When China attacked Tibet, right? Nehru proposed. Nehru proposed to mediate between Tibet and China, but China rejected it, and China said that it is our domestic matter. Now, but China said that Tibet will maintain its cultural and economic autonomy, right? This is Sikkim, this is Bhutan, right? Now look at, this is Sikkim, right? From the Jammu and Kashmir at one hand, right, in the western sector, and in the eastern it is making border with Myanmar and India. So if you look at 1951, right, 1951, when China attacked Tibet, right? Now India also agreed, okay, Tibet is a part of China. But when China assured that Tibet will maintain its regional autonomy, right? Right? And if you look at, India did Panchshil Samjhauta, Panchshil Agreement in 1954, right? And in this Panchshil Samjhauta, both countries agreed on 5 points, right? What were those 5 points? Now, first point was that both countries will respect unity, integrity, and sovereignty. Both countries will respect unity, integrity, and sovereignty. And if you look at, non-country will attack the other country, non-aggression, non-aggression, right? Equality and mutual benefit, right? No intervention in internal matter of each other. And fifth, that is peaceful coexistence, right? Now these were the five formula, that is called Panchshil principles, that is agreed by both the leaders, Nehru and Zhou Enlai. Now, if you look at, Nehru also visited China in 1954, and Zhou Enlai visited to India, right? And if you look at, in this Panchshil agreement, India conceded lots of things to the China. For example, India lost consul right to Tibet. India also left economic interest and cultural interest in Tibet. right? So that why it was happening, because Nehru thought that, right, Nehru was actually idealist. Nehru was idealist, and Nehru thought that, I'm writing here, Nehru was idealist, and he did not want any conflict in the region. Now, if you look at, he did India Bhutan Friendship Treaty in 1949. He did India Nepal Friendship Treaty in 1950, right? So he thought that there should be no confrontation, no rivalry in Asia, and both countries are victim of colonialism, and therefore both countries should rise and play a vital role in international politics. Now, if you look at in the same year, in 1954, I'm talking about India published a map, right? India published a map, right? And China had no objection. China had no objection at all. Now, if you see, right, in the dawn of the year, the China actually started making more atrocities on Tibet, because there were a Tibet resistance against China. And in those years, if you look at 1956 and 1957, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet visited India, and he, acquainted Nehru about what is happening in Tibet, right? Now look at, when China attacked the cultural center of Lhasa, this is somewhere, it is Lhasa, that is a cultural center and capital of Tibet, right? What happened? Dalai Lama, the 14th religious guru, along with 80,000 of his supporters, walked 2 weeks, 15 days, and they entered here. They entered here in Arunachal Pradesh, right? That time it was in Nepal. It was Nepal, right? And India, given exile to the Dalai Lama, right? So basically that irritated China, right? Now if you look at, it is 1959 when China published map. China published map. Now let me tell you, this time China showed several Indian territory as a part of China. As a part of China. Now what happened, right? China's military actually, advanced, started patrolling on the front. Now India also started new policy, that is called forward policy. That is called forward policy. What is forward policy? Basically, India had given order to the military to be on the front, and now therefore if you look at, the Indian military and Chinese military was actually, just amne samne, right? It was just very near to each other, and therefore if you look at Indian and Chinese army confronted, and sometimes it was actually clash, right? And this clash led to, 1962 India China war. India China war, right? Now this was a very, setback to Nehruvian foreign policy towards neighboring country. Very setback to the Nehruvian foreign policy. Now on October 20, if you look at 1962, China attacked India, right? And it attacked from western eastern side here, and it attacked from western side here, right? And there was also attack here, but more intense attack was here, and this war goes to 4 weeks, right? And if you look at, on 20 November, just a month later, China declared ceasefire unilaterally. Now, meanwhile, if you look at India had written letter to the leaders of the world. Now, let me tell you, US extended help to India, right? But until US help would have come to India, there was an end of war. Now, what was the USSR? USSR did not help India. Basically, it helped China with informations and others, way. Now, if you look at that 1960 India-China war was a very setback to India's foreign policy. Now, after this November 1920, when China unilaterally declared ceasefire, right? It declared that Chinese army will withdraw. So they withdrew in this zone, eastern sector. This is eastern sector, right? They right, but they did not withdraw from Kashmir. Now they occupied this area, and this is basically 38,000 square kilometer area that is called Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin. Now question is why India lost the war, right? Now if you look at why India lost the war, there are multiple answers. One, India was not prepared, you know, to fight war with China, right? And Indian military had no experience to fight at high altitude, whereas if you look at Chinese military had already experienced to fight at high altitude, and they recently fought the war in Korea, right? In 1950, if you look at, there was a 1950 to 1953, right? There was a Korean war, and Chinese army were involved in Korean war, right? So if you look at that happened. Third, if you look at the numbers, Chinese army outnumbered Indian army, right? So if you look at, there was a, and fourth, if you look at the infrastructure and logistics, right? It was Chinese part was more better equipped than Indian counterpart, and that's we lost the war. It was actually setback to the India's foreign policy. I told you that India was humiliated, right? And our diplomatic relations actually broke down between India and China, right? There is a no diplomatic relations, right? And in 1967, again there was a fight in Nathula Pass, Sikkim, right? This time India had given befitting reply, although it is this small war is not popular, right? Now if you look at the world scenario here, it's very important, the 1970. Now if you look at 1970, the US approached China. Now question, why US approached China, right? Now we have to go a little background again. I told you that during 1962 war, Russia helped China, right, with information and other sources. And Russia and China had very close relationship. Even the Korean War, which I already talked about, right? The Russian army and Chinese army both were together to fight against the US and their allies army, right? But if you look at the China also mixed boundary with USSR, and few boundaries were not resolved. And if you look at, by 1969, India, not India, by 1969, China and USSR fought a undeclared war. And if you look at the USSR and China relationship actually got worsened. So if you look at, enemy's enemy is friend, enemy's enemy is friend. So if you look at, USSR is enemy to US, and China also become the enemy to the US, USSR. Now US has come closer to China. The same United States of America, which has not recognized Communist China at United Nations Security Council and at United Nations itself. Now, if you look at Richard Nixon's, but before Richard Nixon's, if you look at Henry Kissinger, Kissinger, visited China in 1970, and Richard Nixon also visited China in 1971. This was the first US Prime Minister visit to China. Now, if you look at before this event, let me tell you, in 1964, China has already, exploded nuclear weapon, right? Nuclear weapon, right? And that was very dangerous to India's security, right? Now, meanwhile, if you look at India went India went closer to USSR. Just see the equation. India went closer to the USSR, right? And if you look at India and USSR got very close relationship, and India assisted by USSR, right, on several accounts, whether it is a defense or grant, assistance, aid, industrial help, technological help, and so on and so forth, right? Now, India-China relationship actually remain, uh, you know, uh, without any diplomatic relations, right? And meanwhile, if you look at 90 again, right, Sikkim got a statehood in India. Now China objected it. China objected it. Now, if you look at what happened then, right, it was 1976. It was 1976 when India, approached China, right, to have diplomatic relationship, right? Now that is welcomed by China. That is welcomed by China, right? And India-China diplomatic relationship has been set up. Now after that, if you look at in 1988, Rajiv Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi went to China. He went to China, right? Rajiv Gandhi was actually the first prime minister after Nehru. Nehru also went to China in 1954, right? And Rajiv Gandhi went in 1988. Our relations become more closer, right? And then if you look at PV Narasimha Rao, right? Then if you look at Manmohan Singh, right? Before Manmohan Singh, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, right? Manmohan Singh, right? And Modi ji, right? It means you see that after 1990, we try to make good relations with China. And India-China relations actually improved a lot, especially on economic front, right? And we had no such conflict and struggle at border. But if you look at 2013 was a major point. Why it was 2013? Now, if you look at 2013, when China started Belt and Road Initiative, that is called BRI. It was an ambitious program of China to revive its old Silk Road, right? And if you look at the same year, the new president came, Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping is considered as Neo Mao. Now, if you look at Mao was expansionist. he annexed Tibet by force and accommodated it in China. Now, if you look at Xi Jinping, he's also expansionist. Since 2013, there had been multiple incursion of Chinese military into Indian territory. They put up a tent, and after India's objection, the military withdrew from that area, right? And if you look at, China is actually claiming several parts of Indian territory. I'll come later, right? And if you look at, China is asserting in East China Sea. It is claiming on the island which is actually already claimed by Japan, and it has claimed the entire South China Sea, right? Now, if you look at it has one China policy. It is more assertive during Xi Jinping. So, if you look at Xi Jinping is actually expansionist, very expansionist, right? It wants to take many country under its influence, right? And BRI is a something which I will explain later on, right? So if you look at after 2013, there are several attempts of military incursion in India's territory. And then if you look at, despite of the fact, the you know Chinese 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 leaders also came to India. Indian leaders went to China to make relations more good, more better. But if you look at, Indian and China relationship got worsened. And if you see, there was a 2017, there was a Doklam struggle. And whatever is Doklam? Doklam is actually between, basically here is a Doklam. Let me put a new yeah. Now if you look at this red, this is a Doklam, right? Which is contested area. And if you look at, Chinese military started making infrastructure like road, right? And then it is opposed by the Royal Army of Bhutan, but Chinese army pushed them back. Then Royal Bhutani army requested Indian army to help. And then if you look at, it was a 2 month you know struggle between Indian and Chinese. So it was just Doklam standoff. So if you look at 2017, it was resolved after 2 months. But if you look at the western sector here, there are many area which is actually point of contestation between China and India, right? And if you look at, right, Galwan, right? There's a Galwan, then Pegong Lake, then Sumar, then Demsok, and many areas. Galwan, we have seen that there's a clash between Indian and Chinese army in 2022, right? 2020, basically May 2020, not 22. Yeah. So there was a clash, and then if you look at, there is a conflict between Indian and Chinese military. So there is a continuous border conflict, and it is a live, right? It is it is a very much live border conflict, and there's a both the sides have actually amassed military on both the sides, right? And there's a negotiation is going on between India and China, right? And somehow it is on the way to resolve. It has not resolved yet, right? Now this is a small story about India and China since independence. But let me talk about what are the cooperations that we evolved. I was talking about, if you look at Indian leaders who visited China, right? Like Rajiv Gandhi visited China, then Narasimha Rao visited China, Atal Bihari visited China, Manmohan Singh visited China, Modi ji visited China. Then something would have been evolved in cooperation now, right? Like political cooperation, right? So like economic cooperation, like cultural and diaspora, and so on and so forth. So let me talk about the cooperation between these two countries, right? Cooperation between India and China. India and China. Now, if you look at the political cooperation. Now, if you look at, we can divide this political cooperation into two parts. One is actually 1950s when India and China had good relations. Look at the Panchsheel Agreement where there was a slogan Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, right? And but later on it got deteriorated, right? But after, if you look at second phase, that is after 1988. Now if you look at after 1988 to till 2020, right? Now if you look at both country, right, had good political cooperations. As I already told you that after Rajiv Gandhi, several prime minister of India visited China, and Chinese counterpart visited to India, right? So we had good political cooperations, right? Now look at the economic cooperations. Economic cooperation. Now, if you look at India and China trade, it has increased over the period of time. Let me for you give you example. If you look at 2000, yeah, look at 2000, right? Our trade was basically approximately $3 billion, $3 billion in 2000, right? Now, if I talk about 2022, right? Now, this trade reached to $100 billion. It means if you look at the rise, right, of trade between India and China, it is a huge. But if you look at, the Indian export to the China and Chinese export to the India, right, out of 100 billion, if you look at India export, India's export is approximately I'm talking about 13.5 billion dollar. 13.5 billion dollar. On the other hand, if you look at China's export to India, it is approximately 87, right? 87 billion dollar. So there is a huge trade deficit in favor of China. Now, if you look at Chinese goods, right, it is, if you look at the Indian market, Chinese goods are filled with, right? If you go to the toy shop and if keep all the toys out of that shop, basically that shop will be empty, right? So that shop is basically filled by the Chinese product, right? Now if you look at the festivals like Deepavali or any other festivals, or if you go to the any things, right, look at the Chinese. So India has evolved as a bazaar for China. Now if you look at, right, what India export to India export basically IT, right, IT related things, and also pharmaceuticals, right, and also other things, right, for example automobiles, right? But if you look at what China export to India, it's too much. It's too much. So if you look at economic cooperations, there have been economic cooperation between India and China, right? Right now, look at the third cooperation, that is cultural and diaspora. Cultural and diaspora. Now, if you look at culture, of course, India sent Buddhism to China very historically, very long back, right? And if you look at China and India is very much culturally connected, very much connected, right? India and China are the two big civilization of the world, right? And it is culturally connected, right? Now, if you look at the area where the Shiv, right, that is called Shiva, that I'm not remembering that area, right? In Kashmir, right? So if you look at people wants to go there, right? So if you look at culturally, we are very much connected, right? Right. Now look at the diaspora. There are approximately 35,000 Indians living in China, right? And out of 35,000, 18,000 are basically students who are doing different courses in different university of China, right? Right. So if you look at, there is a cultural and diaspora cooperation, right? Now if you look at the cooperation at multilateral organization, cooperation at multilateral organization, right? Now if you look at multilateral organizations like BRICS, right? Both Asian countries are the economic giant in Asia, right? And if you look at BRICS has been formed in 2001, but summit started in 2009. And if you look at BRICS has two, bank, you can say that is called Asian Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, right? That has been established to support fund for the development of infrastructure, right? And second is, if you look at, that is called contingency reserve agreement, contingency reserve agreement. Now this has also a fund, right? Reserve fund to support the BRICS members when they face economic crisis, right? And Asian development basically to support, right, for the development of infrastructure, right? And these two are basically an alternative to the World Bank and IMF. You must be aware of the fact that World Bank and IMF both are dominated by US and EU, European country basically, right? And therefore, if you look at, both country wants to have an alternative, lending agency. So ADB, Asian Development Bank, is lending agency, whereas contingency reserve agreement is basically it is an agreement when any BRICS members face economic crisis. In that time, this reserve contingency fund shall be used, right? So look at BRICS. Now let me move to the another another basically economic actors, and that is called, if you look at AIIB. What is this? Basically this is Asian infrastructure investment bank, right? Its head office is located in Beijing, and it came in 2016. Now if you look at, both China and India are basically the founding member. And if you look at, China as the biggest share in AIIB. What is AIIB? It is actually again lending agency. Lending agency. What does it mean? It gives loan for the development of infrastructure, right? And if you look at approximately 109 countries are the member. 109 countries are the member of the AIB, right? And again, it is an alternative lending agency. The major lending agency we have World Bank and IMF, right? But if you look at, as I already told, at World Bank and IMF, US and European Union has dominance over the period of time, right? So in the 21st century, now BRICS country and other countries, developing countries, are trying to set up an alternative lending agency, right? And not be solely dependent on World Bank and IMF, right? So basically, if you look at China and India, both are the founder member of AIIB, and China has the largest share, approximately 26%, right? And India has the largest share, that is approximately 8% share, and followed by Russia, right? Russia and Germany. Germany has approximately 4%, right? I don't remember the Russia's data. Fine. So if you look at, both are cooperating at these institutions. Now, if you look at, right, other corporations, look at SCO, right? India along with Pakistan, India along with Pakistan has become member of SCO in 2017, and all members of the SCO are committed to check, the radicalization of religion, right? Terrorism, cyber security, connectivity, to develop connectivity, and so on and so forth. And here again, India and this China is cooperating. Now another institution, look at the global institution, right? Now at the global institution, right, at the global institutions, if you look at, right, what are the global institutions, like if you look at World Bank, IMF, and WTO. Now if you look at both, and China has common interest, China and India has common interest, both have common interest, both have common interest. Now if you look at, both India and China resisted the undue subsidy given to the farmers in the developed country at WTO, right? WTO. Now both China and India wants to bring reform at Bretton Woods system. You must be knowing that World Bank and IMF are the twins of Bretton Woods system that came up in 1944-45, right? So both have common interests in global institutions like World Bank, IMF, and WTO, right? Now, so these are the basically corporations, right? Basically, right? So we have seen these corporations. Now look at the, what are the basically issues, right? What are the issues between India and China? What are the divergence point between India and China, right? Now, if you look at, the first is, let me talk about the BRI, right? Now, if you look at BRI, BRI basically started in 2013, as I told you that, and it is, China gives a fund to countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, to develop infrastructure, right? And if you look at South Asia, are the most beneficiary of this Belt and Road Initiative, and it has 6 routes. Let me draw a picture. right? Now if you look at, this is Pakistan, right? One of the BRI basically goes to this route, that is called China Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, China Pakistan Economic Corridor, and this goes through the Jammu and Kashmir region, right? That is POK, that is, Pike occupied Kashmir, right? And it passes through the Gilgit and Baltistan. And if you look at India claims on Kashmir, so basically India reject BRI. This is one of the region, right? If you look at, India did not involve in BRI. However, if you look at philosophers like C. Raja Mohan, scholars, he argued that India should set aside the differences and, engage in the BRI so that India can get benefit out of it, right? Now, the second, if you look at, right, the border conflict. Now here I'll talk about the border in detail, right? Now again, let me make picture, right? Now if you look at the border conflict, if you divide border conflict, I told you that this is a McMahon line, right? That has been drawn between British India and Tibet, in 1913, right? Now if you look at, this is Aksai Chin, which China occupied in 1962. Now this is the area where we have conflict, right? Different region. Now if you look at the border, we can divide border conflict, right, into three parts. One is western sector, right, which is the longest border we make with China. If you look at entire border that we make with China is approximately 3500 kilometer. Out of 3500 kilometer, if you look at the western sector, right, western sector, if you look at, this is approximately 2100 kilometer, right? And this is something, that Himachal and Uttarakhand makes, that is approximately 600 kilometer, right? And rest is McMahon line. Okay. So western sector is basically, and if you, there is a two line here, that is called Johnson line and McDonald line. Johnson line, that has been drawn in 1865 around, right? And McDonald line that has been drawn in 1893. Now if you look at in Johnson line that was drawn by British, right, the Aksai Chin was a part of Indian territory. On the other hand, if you look at the McDonald line, which is drawn by British, that showed Aksai Chin as a part of China. Now if you look at India, accept Johnson line and China accept McDonald line, right? However, on the ground, if you look at, there is no clear cut demarcation of the boundary between India and China, right? And if you look at the different sector, right, there is lots of conflict between India and China. I told you that, that Pangong, right, then Demshok, then, Galwan, right, five finger point, three finger point. There are many points that is, under conflict, and that conflict led to the bloody clash in May 2020, right? Now if you look at the middle sector, so the western sector most contested, right? Now come to the middle sector. Come to the middle sector. Now if you look at middle sector, it is approximately 600 km, and there is only one point where we have dispute with China, and that is called Harahoti area. Harahoti area, right, where China claims approximately 10,000 square kilometer, a square kilometer land of them, right? And here you have McMahon line, right? So this is approximately, right, 900, you can say that, yeah, 900,000 kilometer, right? And if you see that, this is again here China does not accept McMahon line, right? China actually claims south of the, south of the McMahon line, and it claims the entire Arunachal Pradesh as the part of China. When Arunachal Pradesh was given statehood recognition, China has lots of objection. When Chinese Arunachal Pradesh people go to the China, China says it does not need a visa, right? They can come to China. So there is a, that is called eastern sector. Eastern sector, right? So in eastern sector there is a border conflict, and this is very live border conflict, as I already mentioned several times, right? And this may lead to a war any point of time, right? Now what are the other problem? Other problem, let me talk about, that is a string of pearls. A string of pearls. What is a string of pearls? Now what is a string of pearls? Basically, if you look at China's, right, developing basically naval base at several points. Here is one point, it's called Sitwe in Myanmar, right, somewhere here in Sitwe. It has actually developing port at Chittagong, right? Then if you look at Sri Lanka, there is a Hambantota port. Hambantota port. Now if you look at here this side, there's a Gwadar port. Now look at, right, China is developing. Look at how this China is encircling India. So a string of pearls is basically idea that China is encircling India, right? And this is why if you look at, India has aligned with the US, right, in the recent decade. And India joined also Quad, QUAD, right? This is a group of four: India, Japan, Australia and US. And India is also doing Malabar exercise, right? Malabar exercise. And here in Malabar exercise, if you look at, India is there, then US, right, then Japan, then later on Australia joined it, right, Singapore joined it, right? Now if you look at these countries, right, are doing Malabar exercise, so that it can deter China's, right? But what is China's argument, right? What Chinese strategists say? Chinese strategist says, look, the 80% the 80% of China's energy comes from West Asia, right? Here is, if you look at, here is a West Asia, right? After Pakistan, if you look at the Iran, then West Asia, right? Now 80%, and that goes from this Indian Ocean, right? And here is a, Malacca Strait. Malacca Strait is a very thin, route that actually connect the South China Sea and Indian Ocean, right? Consider if with the US effort, this Malacca Strait is actually choked down, right, or choked, then what China will do? right? It will have greater damage to the Chinese economy, right? So if you look at, China is saying that, since this is a dilemma, right, this is a problem, then that's why we are actually, establishing different port, so that we can increase our presence, right, and we can have, a better economic energy fulfillment from the West Asia. And this was why, if you look at the Gwadar airport, now look at Gwadar airport, the oil will come to the Gwadar airport, and it will cross to the, right, cross to the China through this route, CPC, right, China Pakistan economic corridor, right? So this is a border string of poles is also major concern between India and China, right? Now if you look at the other things, again that is related to, look at Indian Ocean. In Indian Ocean, there is an increasing presence of Chinese, right, military, navy, right? And China is making argument that we are actually protecting Chinese trade, and Chinese trade has increased worldwide, right? And 94% of trade goes from the Indian Ocean, right? So to protect Chinese trade from piracy, right, from the ocean robbers, right, we have increased its presence. But let me tell you, this is actually directly a threat to India's maritime security, right? So this is actually also a problem, right? Now, if you look at what India is doing, now India is actually responding with multiple things. For example, if you look at, India is making good relations with US, which is actually under attack under the Trump regime, right? Then India has joined QUAD Quad. Now if you look at, then also doing naval exercise, then also approach to the Asian countries Central Asian countries, right? And India also approach to the Mongolia, right? So if you look at, and India also making good relations with European countries, so that, right, India can deter China. On the other hand, if you look at, this is Cold War 2.0 era, where if you look at, there's a US and China conflict, right? And US looks India as a ally, right, to deter China. Why is it so? Because if you look at, India has live border conflict with China, and India is the only country in Asia which can actually challenge China, right? And and this is why, if you look at, US making uh, India as a good ally to deter China, right? So basically, if you look at, but again, I will come to the starting point. Look at, when US, right, is actually threatening India's interest, and Trump is making tariff after tariff and penalty. Now, what India should do, right? Now, if you look at, in my opinion, that if you look at, India and China should sync, right, their border disputes, and they must resolve the border disputes, and they should come together, right? Now earlier, if you look at, I told you that from 1990 to 2015, India and China has good relations. Now again, if you look at, here you have another partner, that is called Russia, which is time tested friend of India, right? And if you look at Trump is threatening that you have dead economy. It's not like that. It's not completely not like that. You know, US is under pressure. US is under pressure. Actually, it is declining. It is well established fact that US is declining. Let me give you one example. If you see 2000, right? Now let me compare with China and US. The US economy was 15 times larger than US economy, right? So US economy was large, 15 times larger than Indian Chinese economy. Now if you look at US economy, it is only 1.5 times larger. It is only 1.5 times larger. It means, China is rising. Now if you talk about technology, right, China is rising. If you talk about modernization of military, China is rising, right? So our, the neighboring country China, right, may help India, may help India, right? Provided that India and China should resolve their border disputes and, go for a good relations, right? And can cooperate each other. As if you look at C. Raja Mohan also talk about, right, this idea that India and China should shrink their differences, right? So this is the, discussion that we led, right? And there are more information on India and China, right? And we have limited time, right? I have concentrated my discussion on very, very important, matter regarding India and China relations. Sometimes I'll see you on another issues, right? Again, between India and China. Thank you so much. See you sometime.